Scared for Reals.
Hey, Chris O'Neill.
Adam Perry here, and welcome to episode 2 of Scared for Reals, and we're talking Dawn of the Dead.
45 years old. It's hard to believe this movie has had such a huge cultural impact on everybody. It started out, we got to go back 10 years prior to Night of the Living Dead, which was released in October of 1968.
An even bigger classic, arguably.
Yeah, well, they were kind of on par, but the thing is, when you talk zombie movies, Dawn of the Dead usually gets mentioned before Night of the Living Dead in a lot of cases. It's kind of almost, it's like we're talking like that much difference.
Yeah, but Dawn of the Dead comes out in 78, and what comes out in 78? Halloween.
Yeah.
It comes out, Star Wars. It comes out at a time where, the horror genre in particular is really coming of age.
But we another thing to keep in mind is George Romero, his movies age like fine wine.
Right.
So, yes, Night of the Living Dead actually was a huge financial disaster. Dawn of the Dead, it kind of, I wouldn't even say break even in a way, but it's more like years later, the impact. Sure. And I would say like Dawn of the Dead's impact, it's hard to compare. You can't really compare it to Halloween because it's a different type of movie.
It's definitely a different type of movie, but I'm talking about just the horror genre in general.
Yeah.
This Halloween, Dawn of the Dead, this is where we're going to kick off the whole 80s horror craze and the slashers and then everything else that comes with it. So this is kind of the cusp of, we're going into the golden era of horror.
Right. And, George Romero is the one that started the zombie craze again, because let's face it, before Night of the Living Dead, you had White Zombie, and then you had the I Walked with a Zombie, the Turner Val Newton film, which, again, it wasn't really zombie-ish. It was more dealing with voodoo.
But interesting enough, again, this is what makes George A. Romano so brilliant and so great. He gives us the modern day zombie with Night of the Living Dead because, as you mentioned, White Zombie, that's about voodoo. Right. That's not The Walking Dead like we're used to seeing.
Control. It's like mind control, where Night of the Living Dead is literally the living dead. Yeah.
So, so we can thank, everybody, or we can thank George A. Romano for, giving us the Walking Dead series and, everything that kind of comes with the whole plague outbreak type scenario.
Right. It's like an apocalyptic scenario. And basically, Night of the Living Dead was just him getting together with a group of friends. They just wanted to make a movie. Sure. They wanted to do something. And you bring in Dwayne Jones, and that's when you get more of a not political, but more of a way society was at the time. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't even thinking about doing another zombie movie because he wanted to do other things. And he did do other things after Night of the Living Dead. He did, what was that vanilla movie? I'm sure the people watching this will tell us exactly what the name of the movie is. It wasn't a huge success. Then he did Season of the Witch, and then Crazies, and then Martin, and all of them just were disasters. I mean, most of them are looked upon now with a lot of, they've been revisited, rethought, and they're actually really, really decent movies. And Arrow Video and Second Sight have made amazing additions, not only Dawn of the Dead, but, Arrow's done Season of the Witch, The Crazies, and Second Sight just hit it out of the park with their limited edition Martin set. Which I think there might still be some copies floating around that you can get of that, by the way.
Yeah.
But all of this led to, Dawn of the Dead. He didn't really want to do another zombie movie, but he was looking at a mall at the Monroeville Mall, and some of his friends were talking, what would happen? This would be a great place to be holed up in case of
nuclear fallout
or whatever. And so it got him thinking about the zombies again. And, he used Pittsburgh and the outskirts of Pittsburgh, because Monroeville is like 10 miles east of Pittsburgh. So he filmed in places he knew. That's what these independent filmmakers did at the time, because also you got to think it was the time when the studio system collapsed.
Sure.
Like Night of Living Dead, the Hollywood system as they knew it collapsed. So there was all these fresh independent filmmakers. You had Bogdanovich, you had Lucas, you had Coppola, you had Scorsese. Spielberg was just dipping his toes at that time. Mm-hmm. But the late 60s and 70s, you had all of these fresh American filmmakers with different ideas, and they were literally independent. Dawn of the Dead, they were freezing half the time because there was no heat.
Yeah, it was in the middle of winter.
They literally got stranded in there one night because of the snow. So,
yeah.
I mean, everything in that movie has like a real vibe to it. It was a real, true independent film. And, Tom Savini, that's how he became noted because, I mean, the visual effects, nothing like that had ever been done before.
The debut of Tom Savini, he was offered Night of the Living Dead first, but, for whatever reason, he wasn't ready. But, the Vietnam photographer who had seen the real stuff brought us the real stuff, guys.
Yeah, it was the real stuff. And like literally, Savini looked at the script and was like, how am I going to do this? So they had like different, like the big head explosion at the beginning of Dawn of the Dead literally was a bunch of like different types of food particles.
Right.
And literally, he not only did he dip his toes, he redefined how gore was shown on screens.
Exactly. But let's go back to, again, and don't change the channel because this is by far the least political podcast you'll ever listen to. But it is worth noting when we're talking about certain topics in horror that there is a political commentary on it.
Yeah.
We mentioned before Night of the Living Dead, no intention to make a political statement, but it became a political juggernaut.
Oh, yeah.
For the good. George A. Romero kind of doubles down with Dawn of the Dead. Right from the beginning, you're basically seeing social unrest.
Oh, yes.
With the two anchors arguing as all hell is literally breaking loose outside the news station. And the first kill in the movie isn't from zombies. It's from people.
Right.
And again, he shows us that the most terrifying thing in the world is not the zombies, it's the people.
It's the people. And there's not only, Romero also brings up, there's racism, and there's also how society as a whole, I mean, the dialogue, this was an important place in their lives, and they're talking about the mall.
Yeah.
There's consumerism, there's all sorts of stuff. And that's the interesting thing about a good horror movie. There's a lot of horror movies at that time. Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out in 1974. But I mean, there's a lot of political stuff with that movie. The real solid horror films always had something to say about society at that time. There's always that undercurrent message in those movies.
But again, this goes to the brilliance, I believe, of George A. Romero.
Yeah.
The best directors put that message in, and if you wanted to get the message, you got it. Mm-hmm. But if you just wanted to see a fun, kick-ass horror movie, you could watch it just for that as well.
Right.
And that's what I love the most about George A. Romero. He had his comments, but you didn't have to watch the movie to get the comments. You could just watch the movie for the zombie movie. Yeah,
because it was the way society was at the time. It was just, if you were around at that time, you lived it. That's just the way it was. It was not a over-the-top political preachy movie.
Yes.
That's not what these horror movies were. But at the time, Vietnam had just gotten over, and there's a lot of civil unrest, and there continues to be. But, that's what the horror movies are, the solid, underwritten message. But not only that, it's just entertaining, and the mix of it all. He even has some fun with the score, the goofy Muzak you hear in the mall.
Yeah.
But it's just fascinating. 45 years, and to think when it came out, it wasn't as talked about as it is now.
No, it's really it's like wine. It gets like better. It gets better and better over time.
Oh yeah,
and they just don't make them like they used to.
No. I mean, Scorsese's movies have had a hard time finding an audience when they first come out, but Goodfellas broke even. But we don't want to get into too many of the different filmmakers. But George A. Romero had a similar kind of line as those guys did, because De Palma, Hitchcock, all those movies. Vertigo is considered one of the greatest films of all time.
Right.
But that was a financial disaster when it came out.
Exactly. But, Dawn of the Dead wasn't a disaster.
No, it wasn't a disaster in that sense.
Night, obviously took some time to get water under it. But, Dawn of the Dead, the budget is,
they had a bigger budget.
Yeah, 64,000. But it makes 66 mil.
I know.
Huge for 78.
Yeah, that was huge for 78. And
for an unrated movie because the MPA wanted to rate it X. Wanted to give it an X rating, and George Romero said, no, I'll just release it unrated.
Well, yeah, you see all of right at the beginning when they go in the basement of that apartment complex, they're all eating each other's bones and stuff. And, that's a hard one to get past any type of ratings board.
Right.
It really is.
I could go on about the effects for that movie forever.
Yeah, Tom Savini, redefined, how horror effects were done. We can agree to that. And, it's like...
What a statement for your first movie, though.
Right. Well, yeah, first major movie, yeah.
I still think the most terrifying scenes for me isn't even the goriest. Mm-hmm. It's when the zombie bites the shoulder of the woman and just takes a huge chunk out of her.
Yeah, I know.
And it still makes me squirm to this day, even though the effects are kind of primitive to what Tom well, not only today, but what Tom Savini would eventually go on to do. Yeah. The zombies looked like Frankenstein monster with the blue, green, grayish face skin coloring.
Right.
And the blood looked like something out of a Hammer horror movie. It was orange.
Well, I know, and obviously Hammer's had a huge effect on a lot of people too. But the thing of it is you take a look at all of the makeup and stuff. One of the actors noted just the transformation scene of Roger. Yes, spoil alert. But it took like an hour and a half just to get that little bit of makeup on.
Sure.
So you just imagine all of the extras, how long it took to get that zombie look. And every zombie had their own personality. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about it. All 6 of the Living Dead movies that Romero would make in his lifetime, each time the zombies would grow to have more and more human-like instincts.
Sure.
It was very interesting.
Yeah. But again, that's George.
Yeah, George. Yeah, George Romero. I didn't really care so much for the second trio of films, but the first 3 are definitely just incredible, all in their own way. But yeah, Dawn of the Dead, 45 years old, and it still has the impact. And we were talking. There's like 4 or 5 different versions.
Sure.
Of Dawn of the Dead. Now, the studio, their Anchor Bay, way back, I think it was around the 25th anniversary, there's like a 4-disc set, and it included 2 other cuts. Now, there was also a fan-made cut, which wasn't approved, so it's not on there. And Japan had their own cut of the movie, too.
Yeah.
It was like 90 minutes. They cut out all of the gore, and because it was you take a look at all of the gore in that, not everyone's going to,
Well, not only that, Dario Argento had his own cut too, and sequels separate from.
Yeah, I know he did. Yeah, that was the thing. And Dario Argento, he got involved. He was a huge fan. Invited George to come out to Italy, to write the movie there. So he literally spent like 3.5 weeks, almost a month, in Italy with Dario, writing the script with him, and. He was fresh off Suspiria, which is probably one of the most visually stunning horror films of all time. That came out a year before.
Yeah.
And I think they were talking when he was making Martin. Mm-hmm. Dario was a huge fan of George Romero, and their collaboration was definitely inspired. But, I revisited the European Argento cut. Even though it moves at a much faster pace, there's a lot of heart of the movie that gets cut out, in my opinion.
Yeah, Chris, why don't you tell us about the different cuts? Because me personally, I've seen the original cut.
Yeah.
I've seen the remake, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah.
But, there's definitely different versions of Dawn of the Dead. So why don't you give us a little insight in...
Well, yeah, when Dawn of the Dead first premiered at the Cannes Film Festival it was like almost 2.5 hours. I think it was around 2 hours and 20 minutes. And that's the quote unquote extended cut, which you can find in the Second Sight set that was released a few years back, and then also the Anchor Bay DVD set. But it to me, it was, I felt kind of too long. I mean, I know there were people at the time, there's been several critics who saw the actual premiere at Cannes. Just imagine being in France, watching this movie for the first time with everyone else. And of course, just like Taxi Driver, it got booed because of all of the violence and the gore. But it was just such an incredible thing to watch almost 2.5 hour zombie movie. When was the last time you saw a horror movie that clocked in at that length? It doesn't happen that often. So,
and also remember, it's 1978. The gore and blood that were about to be unleashed by Tom Savini has never been seen.
No, it had never been seen before. But this was at the prestigious Cannes Film Festival in France, and the movie, it's quite unique. There are a lot of like diehard fans of Dawn of the Dead that prefer that cut of the film. And I like how they put the extended cut on the in the package, because you get to watch it, and it definitely, especially the two SWAT guys, Roger and the other guy, Peter and Roger, you get more of their camaraderie, their friendship. It's more fleshed out. You get more details on that, and you also, I mean, the couple in the movie, they're not just like a throwaway couple.
Sure.
Like in the European cut, they're just like, there's no heart to any of the characters. They're just kind of there. You get a little bit of the satire in the Argento European version, but you definitely get it in the extended it's like 2 hours and 19-minute runtime. Again, there's more heart to it. There's more fleshed out characters. I just felt it was too much fat with that one, though. It was way too much fat. And George Romero himself preferred the cut that we're used to today, the original theatrical version in America and around the rest of the world, the 127-minute version. That was the one that Romero himself preferred. And that's the one I prefer as well. That's the one
most people do.
I revisit that, at least once a year. And I know certain theaters like bring it back like once a year. Like it was done in 3D about a year or so ago. And I definitely watched it in 3D, which was sometimes when you force a 3D movie, it's kind of, like they do that with all of the Marvel movies. They force a 3D version. But they did a really good job in doing the 3D version of Dawn of the Dead. It's just one of those movies. It will be undead. It will be undead. Yeah. I know it's a really bad pun, but it just speaks volumes when 45 years later you can put in a movie and you notice something different, or it's like revisiting old friends. Because I don't really notice anything different in like revisiting them, but I grow to appreciate it more and more and more with Romero's, especially the first 3 Living Dead movies he did.
I couldn't have said that any better, man. I mean,
and then about 25 years after George Romero did Dawn of the Dead, Zack Snyder decided to pull it off himself. Now, Zack Snyder, he's mainly an action filmmaker. 300 comes to mind. He did that a few years after Dawn of the Dead, and he's done some of the DC movies. But in my opinion, that was his finest effort, was the Dawn of the Dead remake. And I went to the theater, I saw that like you did probably back in 2004. Yeah. And, it was April of 2004. I was like, okay, I'll see it. It's Dawn of the Dead. It's a remake. I'm just kind of curious about it. And it was actually very stunning, and it wasn't very funny. That was the thing with Dawn of the Dead. George Romero made it more of a satire. There were some funny tongue-in-cheek moments. All of that was kind of gone with this updated version of Dawn of the Dead that Zack Snyder made, but it was post 9/11, right? So it was more serious.
Similar to what Argento did to his version, basically cut all the humor out
Yeah, kind of. But
yeah.
but it was about the same length.
Yeah.
As the version that we watched, the 127-minute version. I think it was about 2 hours. It was like an hour 50 minutes. That's the unrated cut. So I think there was like only like a few minutes. Like it was like an hour 43 minutes that was in theaters. But still, I mean, it still had more heart to it than Argento.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So we're talking 2004. We're talking about the heart of the remake era in horror.
Yes.
So by 2004, you have the Texas Chainsaw remake, which the original one not terrible. We'll talk about that another time. So yeah, Halloween, Rob Zombie's Halloween. If it wasn't out, it was on its way.
Yes.
So there,
There's a lot
the
of
Friday the 13th remake was coming. The Nightmare on Elm Street remake was coming. So this was like the time,
right?
And I will say, Hills Have Eyes. That remake's coming. So like, again, this was the era. I mean, in 2004, like the last original of that era was Freddy vs. Jason.
Right.
So we're in this realm, and honestly, of all the remakes, I will say Dawn of the Dead was one of the better. It was
more interesting. It seemed like it had like more of a fresh take.
Yeah.
On the subject matter, it wasn't so much a remake as it was. It almost seemed like they might have possibly wanted to do a reboot in a way, in a sense.
Yeah, he kind of kept the mall concept,
yes,
and then made the rest his own.
Yeah, he did.
And again, I'll be the first to admit, when it comes to the zombie genre and horror, I'm not the biggest fan. But when I saw this and I saw the way he did the zombies, they weren't the green face, slow walking, growling. Like, these things tried to kill you.
Yeah.
And they were more like rabid animals.
Right.
And that made it terrifying. Especially the first sequence when the husband is turned by the child.
Right.
I mean, that was terrifying.
It was terrifying. To me, it was more of like a video game action movie. But, I mean, the first, like, 15, 20 minutes, even George Romero himself thought the first 15 or 20 minutes of Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead was actually pretty damn good. But it was more focused on action.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was a little bit of character. They tried to force some character development, I mean, Ving Rhames is very charismatic, but it's just, I would have rated that like 3.5 because it still had some unforgettable scenes in there. And you had Sarah Polley. She's actually the lead. Yep. She made these movies to fund her directorial project. She was kind of like Cassavetes in a way, where she would be in some of these, schlock movies.
Sure.
And then, she just did it for money, and so she could make her directorial efforts. But no, Zack Snyder did, this is my favorite Zack Snyder movie. I've never been a huge fan of his. The guy knows how to shoot action. And I mean, there's obviously the gore factor. There's way more gore. But to me, when it comes to like the modern zombie movies, it's still not as effective as 28 Days Later. That was the movie to me that redefined the faster moving zombies.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't hit that mark that, Danny Boyle did. But I mean, I know that's kind of completely different, but in a sense, Danny Boyle was also influenced by George Romero's zombie movies as well. He just tweaked it and made it his own. There's paying homage.
Right.
And then there's kind of just stealing in a way and really not adding anything new. Zack Snyder actually did add some new elements to it, which made it interesting to revisit more than once. Right. Like I've seen it like 3 or 4 times since I've saw it in the theaters. But it just doesn't have that magic. It's missing the magic that Romero brought to the 1978 film. And I love how Night of the Living Dead, ultra serious. Dawn of the Dead is serious in a sense, and some of these characters will not make it. Right. You know that for a fact. Roger has got that attitude. You love the guy. He's cool, but it's going to be the death of him. You know that. Right. But it's just there's a lot more heart to the movie. It seems more of like a human approach versus Zack Snyder's.
Yeah, but that's the problem with remakes, isn't it? You know,
Some of them.
are any of them really going to live up to their original counterpart? You know, because of that magic. I mean,
Right.
We've seen basically 2 remakes of Halloween. Did either of them catch the magic of the 1978 junk? Absolutely not.
No, but you take a look at, I hate to use my favorite filmmaker, Scorsese, but look at what he did with Cape Fear. He completely redid it.
Right.
And yes, the same plot elements were there, but it was still his own movie. And just like he did with The Departed and other remakes Kubrick, did a lot of remakes too, but it's all on how you present it. It's
right.
You're paying homage, but actually making it your own film. And there are instances where Zack Snyder captured that in Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah.
But you just can't escape. I mean, they literally use a lot of the same lines. You get Ken Foray doing a cameo as a mad prophet,
right,
saying the same thing he said.
Right.
When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. I mean, he uses both of those. It's a very great line.
Right.
It's an unforgettable line. And Zack Snyder kind of uses it his own way to make it like a They Live kind of concept, a mad prophet on the TV. But it's still there's a lot of good stuff in Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. You can't easily dismiss it as just a run-of-the-mill remake. He did put a lot of good stuff in there. It just, you can't escape the fact that it was done so much better the first time. And it's very rare. It has been done.
And that's the thing, and that's the point I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
Like when it comes to remakes, there's
very few chances.
It's a very, very razor-thin edge.
Yeah.
You either got the 1998 Psycho, which was a shot-for-shot remake and absolutely terrible, or
we're going to forget about that movie. that wasn't that didn't exist.
or you get the recent Universal's attempt at Invisible Man, where it had an invisible person and it had the title Invisible Man, but had absolutely nothing to do with the Invisible Man story.
But you take a look at, again, I'm bringing up another American filmmaker who came out around the same time as George Romero did, Brian De Palma. He basically remade a couple of Hitchcock movies.
Yeah.
But they were his own. He took what Hitchcock did and made it into his own. Dressed to Kill. You can't just say, oh, it's Psycho. It's so much more than that.
Right.
It's so much more than that. And Zack Snyder almost gets to that Brian De Palma level.
Sure.
Almost with that movie. And you're right. Most of those remakes, the Halloweens, Rob Zombie's Halloween was kind of more of a grindhouse thing. I liked his approach to that. We'll talk about that when we talk about Halloween.
Right.
But Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, there is some good elements. It just doesn't hit the same level as the original. And there's very few remakes
that can do that.
And, Zack Snyder came the close. Out of Brian De Palma aside, Zack Snyder came the closest, I think, to doing a real decent remake.
All right. So what were some of the things about Snyder's version that you liked?
Well, again, the whole beginning, the first 20 minutes is actually very, very, very cool. I love the first 20 minutes. They put more of a focus on Sarah Pauli's character, and they Ving Rhames is kind of a police officer, just like Peter is in the original. But Sarah Pauli is a much tougher heroine.
Which I can't remember the actress's name.
Sarah. From the first one, that was the thing.
The screaming. She wasn't the typical final girl.
She couldn't do the scream.
Yeah,
she could not do the scream. And Brian De Palma actually makes fun of that in Blowout, but we'll talk about that at some other time. But yeah, she had never acted before. A lot of these people, that's another thing to bring out with George Romero's movies. Most of them were not professional actors. Ken Foray, I think, is the only guy that kind of went on to have a cult name. He was in some vampire movies afterwards, but most of them just they weren't actors.
Yeah,
one of them worked at a restaurant. And they auditioned, and they were just so excited they got the part,
Yeah. It's Romero, use what you got.
Right, use his friends, Most of the, he had to, get a whole new cast for Dawn of the Dead, but Night of the Living Dead, literally, they chipped in $600 each. And
right.
They made the movie. Mm-hmm. They had to take breaks to film commercials, because that's how he started. He started as like a delivery guy for these film stock companies, and then he got together with a group of friends, made commercials and they made some money out of that, and all the money went to Night of the Living Dead.
Right.
They take a break from shooting, film some commercials, and then they go back. And some of those commercials, they show some of them in behind the scenes on the Dawn of the Dead. Like a little sci-fi commercial about washing machines.
Right. Yeah.
It's really interesting. But yeah, he made commercials so he could pay for Dawn of the or Night of the Living Dead. If that isn't independent filmmaking, I don't know what is.
But all right. So yeah, we're kind of going all over the place here. But so, just to wrap up the Zack Snyder thing. So you like the first 20 minutes.
Yes.
Anything else about it that stands out that, you really think, brought it to a more enjoyable watch than most of the remakes at the time?
Well, most of the we were talking about Argento's cut of the original Dawn of the Dead. It took out some of the satire. I mean, it chopped 10 minutes out of the original Dawn of the Dead. But the thing that Zack Snyder, it was more serious. There really isn't any tongue in cheek. There's some tough guy lines in that movie, but it's pretty dour. There's at least hope at the end of, we're doing a spoiler alert here. I'm assuming you've seen
the movie
Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, the movie's 45 years old, guys. If you haven't watched it, watch it.
Yeah, watch all of the cuts. I encourage you to watch all the cuts. But at least all three of the cuts of the original Dawn of the Dead, there's some hope. How's our gas? Well, it's kind of low. All right. They kind of just go with it. There is some hope there.
Sure.
But Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, there's like no hope.
Yeah. Especially the end credits where they do the lost footage stuff where they think they're safe at an island just to find,
it's over inhabited by zombies.
Yeah.
So it's like you think they almost escape, but it just, it's the whole post 9/11 mindset. It was just very dour, and it's just it's still very watchable, and I enjoyed it. 3.5 stars out of 5 for me for the Zack Snyder Dawn of the Dead.
Okay, cool. We'll note that at the end of the show. We'll rank them both, but I will note you at 3.5 stars for Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead.
Now, one thing you got in more details about George Romero's partner, his producer.
Yes,
because I remember reading. Like in America, you can't buy Dawn of the Dead anymore, and it's like I remember the Second Sight version came out a few years ago, and it's okay. You can buy, you can still, if you have a region-free Blu-ray player, I encourage you to check out Second Sight. Even though you can't get the big, flashy, limited edition box set anymore, you can still get it in Blu-ray and 4K.
Yeah. Funny what I say, go see the movie where you can't buy the damn thing anywhere.
Well, you can't buy it in the United States.
Again, well, yeah, because, all right, so backstory about that is Rick Rubenstein, George A. Romero's partner and producer on Dawn of the Dead in the mid-2000 teens, I guess we can call it. Yeah. He wanted to produce a full-blown 3D production of Dawn of the Dead. He sunk millions of dollars into doing it, and just like George's commentary on capitalism and consumerism in Dawn of the Dead, old guy makes bad decision and blows up in his face. Yeah. So he basically says, well, screw you guys to all the fans. He takes Dawn of the Dead, the original, out of print in the United States and will not release it on any streaming services.
But you can still, you have to import. You can import Dawn of the Dead. You just cannot buy it here. It's not available here, but you can import it elsewhere.
So, go on a foreign site and buy Dawn of the Dead. Watch Dawn of the Dead.
Well, no, the cool thing is you can go to sites like, I think Diabolic. You can buy the standard version of Dawn of the Dead, and they get it from Second Sight. They have a good relationship with Second Sight. I mean, there are places, different retailers online that you can get Dawn of the Dead. You just can't buy, like the Anchor Bay DVD set that I have is no longer in print.
Right. Which again, Anchor Bay puts together awesome stuff, so you're kind of missing out there.
Yes, but I highly recommend if you don't have any version of Dawn of the Dead on home video. I mean, I know some people have a hard time with physical media nowadays. I get it; takes up some space. But there's certain movies, like Dawn of the Dead is like an essential horror film for me. I'm not as big of a horror film guy as Adam is, but there are certain horror films that I will revisit over and over and over again. And Dawn of the Dead is one of them. And I'm so happy that I picked up that Anchor Bay cut. And I mean, eventually, someday, I might actually, get that nice second sight, because they do an amazing. It sounds like we're doing plugs for these companies, but I'm letting you know, just because you can't get a hold of a copy in America, you can get a hold of copies elsewhere.
But I mean, that just goes to show, and the point of why we are doing this show right now is, it sounds like we're kind of plugging, but as we talk about these older movies,
right.
these older classics, it's I don't know how you feel. My job is to introduce these to people who may not have seen them yet.
Right.
Because I in my day job, I work with 19 and 20 years olds who have never seen movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark or
I know.
Back to the Future. You know, so if you're listening and you've never seen these movies, check them out.
Oh yeah,
there's a reason why they're called the classics.
And we were throwing a little tiny bit of shade at Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, but it's the best movie I think he has done.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
Yeah, and again, a younger crowd might only know Batman vs Superman,
right,
or Justice League, which was a mess.
The Snyder Cut.
Come on. So. And again, we are going to be talking about current movies, obviously, with Thanksgiving later in the month coming out. That's going to be the rage and the talk in the horror genre. But again, as last week we talked about Boris Karloff.
Right.
Later in the month, we're going to be talking about Frankenstein.
Right.
Think of it this way: to you horror fans, had it not been for Dracula and then 6 months later Frankenstein, there would be no American horror genre.
Oh yeah, well,
I'm sure it would eventually came.
Well, no,
but as we know it today,
right? Well, George Romero, when he was younger, he went to the movie house as a kid. He saw Frankenstein, he saw Bride of Frankenstein, he saw Dracula, all on the big screen, and he was mesmerized. And the interesting thing is, you think these horror guys are just into horror movies, but George Romero, the reason he wanted to make movies was not because of those movies. He loved them,
right?
But the movie that set him over the edge, Tales of Hoffman by Pressburger and Powell, and it's a musical opera.
Yeah.
It's a ballet, it's a dance, it's music, and it's one of the most colorful films you'll ever see. And you would never think a guy like George Romero would make a movie. He said that was like, I'll never get to that level, but he always was inspired because of Tales of Hoffman.
Right.
A movie that's 70 years old and
again, and it goes for all of them. My former podcast, I interviewed Adam Marcus. Mm-hmm. And we all know Adam Marcus, Jason Goes to Hell. He told me the story when I was interviewing him, that the day he knew he wanted to be a director was when he saw the Imperial Cruiser fly across the screen and the original Star Wars.
Right.
It wasn't Dawn of the Dead.
No.
It was seeing that, and he said, I want to do that for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I mean, he fell into the horror genre, and he's done great stuff, but
all these guys, they've seen horror films. They love the horror films. George Romero saw a lot of those cheesy sci-fi B movies of the early 50s, but it was Tales of Hoffman that really, this is what I want to do. I want to make movies.
Yes. So
we want to know what you think. You've heard us ramble on here about the original Dawn of the Dead, all cuts, and you've heard us talk about Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. Do you actually think Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead is better than the original Dawn of the Dead? We don't think so, but if you do, comment, reach out to us, let us know what you think about any of the Dawn of the Dead movies, and if you want to hate on us, go ahead and do that too. We just want to hear from you. All our links are in the bio section.
Yeah, guys, this is a podcast for fans.
Yeah,
done by fans, so we want conversation.
Right, we want to know what you think.
If you think Zack Snyder's scary, I mean, listen, the pregnant zombie was terrifying. All right?
It was a little cheesy to me. It was a little over the top, but again, that's when the movie kind of lost me.
Right,
Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead was was that one. That scene, it was like, this is too much.
We're getting too crazy.
It was all right. I mean, I know a lot of people like that. You don't mind it. I kind of just like, it's kind of cheesy and overdone. That's just me.
Well, tell us what you think. Comment, message us. If you bring up a good point or have a good question, we'll give you a shout out right here on the show and discuss it.
Right.
So, Facebook, Instagram, X, or Twitter, whatever you call it, or right here on YouTube in the comment section. So hit us up.
You've heard me rate. I give the original Dawn of the Dead 4.5 stars, and I give Zack Snyder's 3.5.
Okay. I'm gonna go with the original Dawn of the Dead. I'm gonna go 4.
Okay.
That's kind of a generic scoring for me. I usually get into the 0.1s, 0.2s, 0.3s, but it's such the classic.
Yeah.
It's there's so much there to.
But 4, not 5.
So I give it a 4. It's very hard for me to give anything a 5.
Oh, really?
I'm very. There's a few movies that I would give a 5.
Yeah, there's like 250 movies that I give 5 stars to, and that's it. Thousands I've seen. Yes.
Yeah.
I hear you there.
So I'm going to give a round number of 4 for the original. Zack Snyder, I'm going to go, we'll say like 3.3.
Okay.
All right.
That's
not
fair.
quite a 3.5, but better than a 3. Again, being a fan of not really the biggest zombie movies genre fan. When I saw it and I saw how he did the zombies, they weren't just the typical Walking Dead, groaning, mumbling, creatures of the night. That these things actually went after people, tried to kill people, and
Romero,
it made you jump.
Yeah, Romero would eventually get to that point. But Romero is the guy who started the zombie movie as we know it. If it wasn't for him, there'd be no Return of the Living Dead.
There'd be no Walking Dead, the monster that Walking Dead is from AMC.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about The Walking Dead. That was a major disappointment.
Maybe just to irk Chris a little bit on a future episode.
Yeah, maybe. No, but again, let us know what you think. Comment below. Reach out to us through social media. Scared for Reels. You can find us everywhere. I'm Chris O'Neill.
I'm Adam Perry, and tune in next Tuesday. We're going really cult, really otherworld, literally from Japan.
No, Korea.
Korea.
We're gonna talk about the 20th anniversary of Old Boy. We're gonna go into that. We're gonna probably talk about the trilogy a little bit. See, we're not only horror movies, we're also B movies, cult films. Movies. And Old Boy just got a beautiful 4K restoration. We'll talk all about that next time.
Yeah. So if you like disturbing, Old Boy next week.
Yeah, Scared for Reels.
We'll see you next time on Scared for Reels.